Welcome to the webinar. We'll be starting in just a moment. We'll give folks a moment to join in. We'll be starting in just a moment. We're letting folks join in now. We'll be starting in just a moment. And welcome to ARMA International's webinar, Take Your IG Program to the Next Level with Continuous Audit. I'm Nick Inglis. I'm the Executive Director of Content and Programming at ARMA, and I'll be both your host and a participant in today's webinar. For those who have attained your IGP, the Information Governance Professional Certification, today's webinar counts towards one continuing education credit in the Information Management category. If you have a question, at any point throughout the webinar, feel free to ask in the question and answer box. We are unlikely to get to all questions during the webinar, but we will respond to any questions received after the webinar has concluded. Before we get started, I want you to consider doing something great for yourself, all while helping support ARMA this year. ARMA professional members continue to say over and over again that they're wildly satisfied with what they're receiving as a professional member. Over 95% of our members say that they would recommend ARMA membership to colleagues. I don't know of any other association that comes even close on that metric. ARMA is on the rise, and we need you to help us get the message out. The people who are managing information in their organizations, only a small percent are actual ARMA members. That needs to change, and we need your help getting the word out. Remember that feeling that you had when you first discovered ARMA and all of the resources that you gained access to as a professional member. I want you to take a moment this week and share that feeling with someone else who needs it. Get other people on the path towards success and encourage your company or your organization to make everyone who's managing information in your organization a member, a professional member of ARMA International. We even offer group discounts to make it easier for you to connect your company or organization with ARMA. Share the feeling that you're of knowing that you're not alone in this. Share ARMA professional membership. ARMA InfoCon 2020. It is coming and it's going to be incredible. We are heading to the Motor City, the home of Motown, and the land of Kiss, Detroit Rock City. You cannot miss this year. You can't miss our signature event from October 26th to 28th, 2020. Registration is now open, so head to arma.org/infocon after the webinar and get yourself registered. We are joined today by Ann Snyder, the Manager of Content Development here with me at ARMA, and Jim McGuire, VP of Strategic Content Solutions at ASG. ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible. When choosing business partners and solutions for your information programs, I hope you'll give extra consideration to the solution providers that continue to invest in you. Solution providers like ASG. I'm now going to turn it over to Ann, who's going to talk about our agenda for today.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Nick. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Jim, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to just say a little bit more, just a few more words about your background, because I know we're going to connect some of that to what we're talking about today.
Certainly, Ann. Thank you. So I'm Jim McGuire. I've been with ASG for over 20 years now, and before that, I worked for 15 years in chemical manufacturing. And I always didn't have a content and audit and analytics bent. But when I was looking for a solution for our content needs, that's when I stumbled across what was then Mobius. and I've been a believer ever since. It plays a role not only in finance, banking, insurance, but also in manufacturing, public sector, just about every facet where content and information is of great importance.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jim. I'm going to move on to the agenda. So today we're going to talk about using continuous auditing and analytics to take your IG program to the next level. We'll first go into the problem that this is meant to address, these siloed and point-in-time one-off approaches to information governance. We'll define what we mean by continuous auditing and analytics, and then look at two common IG scenarios. There's sort of two big buckets in which we would divide these kinds of problems. We'll get into some specific use cases where you can use continuous auditing and analytics, and then look at the benefits that can be achieved, how it can take your IG program to the next level. And next, we'll turn to a little discussion about ASG and the kinds of work that it does, what services it provides, and then look at several case studies with Jim. And then we'll open it up to a Q&A. And as Nick said, you can ask questions, and we'll get to those at the end of the program. So the problem that we're trying to address is a siloed and point-in-time one-off approach to IG. Ideally, information governance is not a once and done effort. For it to be strategic, it can't be. So to fully enable your information to be a useful asset and reduce liability, it has to be effectively managed. It has to be effectively governed throughout its entire life cycle. And when we think of advanced IG programs, we think of ones that are doing IG in a continuous way. They're optimizing their programs. They're not reacting to problems. It's a proactive approach, and again, continuous, non-siloed across the organization. So I'm just going to pull up the ARMA information lifecycle. We've seen this, several times in the past, and it's available on our website. What we mean in terms of a lifecycle approach is that information has to be governed from the moment it's created and captured at the far left in this graphic to its final disposition, which could be deletion or archiving. And that's making sure that you have basically what you need, where you need it, when you need it. And importantly, and I think this is the thing people forget about, the flip side of this, is that it's not in a place or in a form that it shouldn't be. So we have both sides of this. It's about findability and usability of the information, but also about making sure that it's being handled in a compliant manner. So if you have information, for example, in the wrong place, you can't appropriately place the kinds of access and security controls around it. You also need information to be in the right form. It has to be, that's the what portion of this. And that means it's both accurate and reliable. You want to ask questions like, is it consistent across systems? Is the information complete? Can you trust this data? That's the what, getting the right stuff to you. And then also, again, another aspect of the form is it redacted, anonymized? So there's some information that you might be able to use, repurposed for something else, but it needs to be protected because of the nature of what we're seeing within the content. So again, the issue here is often IG projects are executed in silos. Someone's performing a task in one business area, they're not communicating what's happening to other business units, or it's done as a single point in time, a one-off effort. This could be a reconciliation task, we'll get into that specifically, or some kind of cleanup. And then often the problem that generated the need for the cleanup has to be redone. And the idea here is, rather than doing it in this isolated one-off or point-in-time approach, is to do it continuously throughout the life cycle of the information. Instead of finding a problem, fixing it, and letting it recur, you look for this as it's happening and capture it in real time. So this is a little bit hard to, I think, understand sometimes in the abstract. So let's look at a couple concrete examples. So you've just updated your policies and procedures. And it could be something, just even targeting handling sensitive information, PII, social security numbers, credit card numbers, other sensitive information. The question is, you trained your employees, but are you sure that they understood it? Are they complying? So the policy, in the sense, is isolated from, the other work that you're doing. And, again, we dream of being able to do both of these things at the same time. But the question is, are your people actually complying? Are they now, putting sensitive information into a location or using it in a form like unredacted or not anonymized in a non-compliant location, like a shared drive, a SharePoint site, or even a data lake. We often, in some industries talk about repurposing clinical data, and that's great. You may have the right permissions in place, but connected to those permissions, it has to be anonymized to protect the identities of people. The other question is, are you processing it in an appropriate way? Am I sending some kind of sensitive information, a confidential email, or non-encrypted, non-redacted information via email? So the idea here is, what if you could ID and correct those policy deviations as they occurred? So the idea here again is giving an alert as the error happens, catching it and correcting it. So this is a way to not only see whether your policies and procedures are being followed, but to prevent the any of the sort of sequelae of consequences that can happen if you don't correct it in real time. So continuous auditing and analytics can help you do this. Example 2, and this should be something that's familiar to many of us, and we'll get into more details on this specific example, is a remediation project. So you've done a massive remediation project. You're cleaning up file shares, data stores. The question is, have people resumed their old habits? Have they mucked up those data stores again? What if you could avoid a costly redo of that remediation, and also the sort of difficulty of getting budget for it? You've already done this 5 years ago. Why are we doing this again? This is obviously related to example 1, because we're talking about sort of the compliance and following our policies. But as IG professionals, again, this is connected to the siloing. Sometimes we're handling the policy as one project and this remediation task as a separate project. Ideally, we would be using a multi-pronged approach to attacking IG, but the realities of it are we might have budget or resources or personnel for only handling one of those at a time. Again, here the concern is, the cost of doing a redo, and also in the interim between the time that you have cleaned up your data store and the next time that you do it, there's the issue of non-compliance. What spurred you to do this cleanup project in the first place? Was it that sensitive data was where it shouldn't have been? You don't want to let it get there. So the idea again of continuous auditing and analytics is that you can get an alert. What if you could get an alert before this information got put in the wrong place, so you could prevent this kind of remediation project from needing to take place go forward?
And a lot of work is done in those remediation projects, right, Anne? I mean, you're identifying, how we need to classify content, how long we need to retain it, what's its disposition, and to go through all that work and not be able to leverage it over and over again, to have to do it as a project each time, it can be very frustrating and costly.
Right, and I think that we get into that too, and we'll get into that shortly. How you can sort of repurpose the information that you learned in those remediation projects. You are defining the business rules that you need to set up the technology to grab this information upstream. Again, it's one approach is the remediation, just cleaning up the mess. The other approach that we're talking about is stemming the flow, preventing it from happening again. It's the go forward. So it's the cleanup, the point in time, backward looking, and then the forward, and that's where continuous auditing and analytics can come in. So example 3. You've just completed a major data reconciliation. And what we mean here is this can be a point in time. This could be part of a routine monthly or quarterly reconciliation of some kind of information, very often financial, or it can be a one-off. You're cleaning up, you're reconciling, two data stores, two systems to make sure that the metadata, for example, is consistent, like a master metadata project or something like that. The question is sort of, are the same errors and inconsistencies cropping up again? So you've cleaned them up once, are they happening again? What if you could catch and clean up these errors in real time and ensure and improve the quality and reliability of your information, as well as reducing the burden of the manual reconciliation? Again, manual reconciliations are a heavy lift. They're massively error prone if people are entering, in these kinds of scenarios, numbers, letters, things like that. That's exactly where humans do less well than machines. And again, where it's incredibly labor intensive. So the idea here again with continuous auditing and analytics is getting an alert, identifying you to the exceptions that you would otherwise identify manually, things like inconsistent content, missing content, or wrong structures. For example, you have the wrong data pattern. and alerting you to that so that you can catch it in real time. Do you have anything to add on this one, Jim?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Ann. The whole idea behind, continuous audit and analytics is, what your business rules are, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what should and should not be. And once you know what that is, you can establish those rules and have it,
Mm-hmm.
automatically identify those exceptions and alert you before they get further downstream.
Mm-hmm. And the other part is, the ones that are not the exceptions, let those go through. You can
Exactly.
automate a lot of the process for the positives. So instead of having people check the ones that are right and consume, the right pieces of data that you're reconciling, those can move forward in the process, and only the ones that need the human eye, the human intervention, can be grabbed. Create an alert system to create and also trigger a workflow to resolve it.
And in my experience, the business process exceptions tend to take up more than half of a staff's time,
Mm-hmm.
chasing down, doing the investigation, corrective action steps. It can
Mm-hmm.
be a real headache
Mm-hmm.
trying to back out those exceptions.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into some of those specific examples as we move forward. So what do we mean when we say continuous auditing and analytics? So let's parse the words. So I think it's fairly straightforward. And I just want to also just take a moment to distinguish it. ASG does have a technology that has a name very similar to this. We're talking about a methodology and not that specific technology, but Jim will be talking about that shortly. So the idea here is continuous, means it's ongoing. It's happening all the time. I mean, it's obviously happening at a point in time in one sense, but it's not, there's not a lot of distance between the points in time. It of course takes a moment to process information. So instead of, reconciling your financial, doing some kind of reconciliation every month or every quarter or yearly, and those are, routine tasks that we have to do, that it's doing this continually. The idea is it's looking at the information in real time. Instead of, checking it at the end of the month, you are checking the two data sources, the invoice versus the purchase order, in real time before it moves on to accounts payable, and then you realize, oh, we have to back something out. So that's the example Jim was referring to. The point of auditing. So we often think about auditing in terms in the financial context, but basically just reviewing information. But since it's tax season, so imagine you're getting audited. What happens? The IRS comes and checks your books. It's looking at your records, and that's what we're talking here. You're looking at the information, looking at the records, and getting some information about it. The analytics part is you're doing some kind of analysis of it. And when we think of analytics too, I'm talking about it here generically, but there are analytics tools that allow you to look at that information that you've pulled out of the document. So, the IRS example, if we want to continue it, the analysis is, hey, you're missing the receipts to support this deduction, or what you've reported as your income doesn't match what your employer has reported to us. So there's an inconsistency or something like that. So instead of handling this after the fact, instead of doing this as a cleanup, continuous auditing and analytics approach moves the operation further upstream at an earlier point in time to catch and prevent those errors from getting in your systems, to catch them again in real time as they're occurring. And most IG programs, of course, would benefit from a two-pronged approach, both the cleanup aspect. If you have an IG program or a company that's been around for any length of time, you already have some stuff that you have to clean up. Just think about your inbox, how much you have to process in there. And then think of all of your systems now. So you have some aspect of your IG program that has to be cleaned up. The other part of it is this upstream process where you are, grabbing it and preventing go forward the same kind of problems that you were addressing in those remediation type projects. Do you have anything on that? Anything else on that, Jim?
No, that's perfect, Dan.
And I think the neat part, and Jim and I have talked about this, is that in any of these scenarios where you're doing a remediation, a cleanup, or you're doing some kind of reconciliation, matching information, you already know what your parameters are. You already know those business rules. Why not capitalize that on at the time that you're doing the cleanup to grab the information, go forward? It's a perfect time to marry the go forward and the retrospective sort of strategies of IG.
That's right.
So if I could divide the universe into two big buckets, and this is sort of where it is right now of sort of IG tasks that are amenable to this, and I'm sure we can think of others. The one scenario is, these information classification type examples. And what I mean when I say that, I mean classification generally. This is, answering the question of what is this information? So what is it? What needs to be done with it? And then what is or should be done to this information? In the case of monitoring behaviors, that's kind of what we're looking. Is that, did you put sensitive information where it doesn't belong? The idea here is that once we know what it is, we can label it. Say, oh, this is trade secret, or this is confidential, and then maybe it gets a certain level of protection. For example, it's a credit card or a social security number or something like that. We need to redact it. We may, once we identify what it is, make a decision of where we have to put it. It's a contract, an invoice, a batch record. It goes into this system of record, etc. The other part is, in automating some of these steps, we can also take advantage of tools that have the ability to recognize certain common forms of documents, like contracts, like invoices, like POs and such. And
based on the metadata.
Right, exactly. And then extract, so we skip another manual step, we extract that data using technology and then can match it. And of course, some extraction methods, you might have a hiccup if the copy you're working from, if it's a, a scan in or something, you might have a hiccup, but it can, again, alert you if there's some issue. And you avoid a lot of those manual steps. The sort of next idea here is this sort of, so that's the sort of remediation, the what is it, in the classification question, what is it, so we can do something with it. The other bucket that we're talking about is information reconciliation. And this is the scenario where you're comparing, and I sort of jumped the gun on there, the POs and invoices. The way this idea where you're comparing two sets of data. You have a purchase order and you're comparing the invoice. You're checking the books at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, and you're comparing numbers and letters or codes and things like that. Again, very, very highly error prone when humans are doing them, and really intensely labor, they're very labor intensive if you're doing it in a manual way. And the idea here, again, is in this reconciliation, you're looking for things like, does this information match? Is it matching across systems? Is it matching across documents? And you can look at that within certain parameters. And, if it's a number, a financial number, it could be within a good enough margin. So my invoice, my invoice was for $1,700, and there's a deviation of a penny. Within that parameter, it probably doesn't, rise to the level of an exception that we would need a human being to look at. You also look for missing data. Is some kind of critical piece of information missing, or is it in the wrong format? And you're comparing it in that case against some kind of standard. And I think we've all encountered this when we're filling out forms online. You're entering data, you put in your credit card number to make a payment, and it rejects it because it recognizes that it doesn't have the right number of digits, or you're entering your social security number or something like that. And again, it says this doesn't fit the form. So those kinds of reconciliation tasks. So let's look at one that is something that IG professionals, most IG professionals would be familiar with. This is, and we've talked about this a little bit. It's a scenario of like the remediation project. So you need to do a cleanup of some data store for whatever reason, and it's often a combination of reasons. There's redundant, obsolete, and trivial data in there. It's rot. There's non-compliant data in there. So you have something that's sensitive stored where it shouldn't be. And or it's just a mixed up share. Things need to get into the system of record where they belong. So the idea here is that you can see on the left there, you have a target, or targets potentially, and you target that information source, and then you do some kind of processing of that. You index the metadata, you index the content, and then you can analyze that data. So this is the where you're getting at. You've looked at the what, and now you're determining you're determining what this information is, so you can make some kind of decision against that, which is the execution step. So you've analyzed it, what is it, and then you're making the determination of what you should do. You could use something as basic as keywords, or you could be recognizing types of documents, numeric patterns. Again, I see a social security number here, or I see credit card numbers. And we have the technology out there to recognize those kinds of information pretty well, and people use them routinely to find that sensitive information and again, lock it down, put it where it needs to be. Depending on the tools that you're using too, you can recognize those different types of documents and again, extract information directly from them, removing some of the manual steps. So based on some kind of rules that we determine, and again, these are rules that we can repurpose, we execute a task against it. We tag it, we move it, we delete it, we redact it, we apply some kind of security and access controls, etc. The specific use case, I can't tell you what your specific use case is going to be, but you know these kinds of tasks, you've seen them, you've done them before. So that the task of this is an invoice, we're extracting a field from it and we're using that to populate some field in a system of record, and we're moving that invoice to where it belongs. The target could be, deletion or outside, or something that's some kind of outside retention or system of record, document management system, or a data lake. So people are often, using data, repurposing it for some kind of analytics project. You have to make sure it's clean when it gets there. All too often, we can see that the original source gets messed up again and we need to redo this. So the idea of continuous auditing and analytics approach is to move these steps, this indexing, analysis, and execution further upstream. So you can either move it to the target or even further upstream if you don't want to get the information into the target itself and potentially get things into a non-compliant manner. Again, you grab the information, do the indexing, analysis, and then make decisions about it. If based on your business rules, though, you can set up an alert system. So if something is easily determined, easily analyzed by your technology, you can pass it along and put it where it needs to go, or apply the appropriate level of warnings or something associated, confidential, privileged, or whatever tag you might want to put on it. But when there's an exception that that our technology can't determine, you can set up an alert system, which can also trigger a workflow and enable review of that document before it gets moved to the target. Do you have anything to add on this one, Jim?
Yeah, that's really important. And the idea that you can identify, index, analyze content before it gets further downstream into a system of record is something that's critical to the success of automated analytics, auditing and analytics. Most folks can identify those problems further downstream, but trying to clean that up, back it out, it can be a painful exercise. So there's really
expensive.
There's a great amount of value by doing that work up front before it gets further downstream and needs to be backed out.
And ideally, again, most people will have some level of cleanup some after the fact cleanup that they're going to have to do. And all of us, most IG professionals, I should say, have undertaken some kind of, remediation, some kind of cleanup project like this. The idea is, instead of just leaving it at that and letting it happen again, is to move upstream to stem the flow, to stop the bleed as well. So a go forward approach as well as a retrospective cleanup approach needs to be married together to have a fully successful IG program. And again, what you learn, again, it doesn't matter which way you approach this, what you learn on the go forward strategy or what you learn on the retrospective strategy gives you the kinds of business rules that you need to apply to the other scenarios. So the idea, again, is, on the bigger issue of IG is, don't silo that information. You've learned something from the one project, reuse it. And we'll talk in a minute too about sort of the reuse of this indexing analysis of the data that we have from a project like this. We do tasks that are related to this all the time. Search requires that you have some kind of indexing of your data. E-discovery, you're indexing and doing some kind of analytics on it. Very rarely are those things repurposed across the organization. It's the rare case where you even see them repurposed across other types of litigation-related litigation. So the idea is, again, to take full advantage of these very, very costly, time-consuming projects where you've learned a tremendous amount of information about your information ecosystem. So the second scenario here is, a reconciliation task. And I'm looking at the sort of the example of an invoice or PO reconciliation, but you've done something similar to this today. If you ordered breakfast or coffee at the store, you've checked your receipt. Does it match what I expected? You know, if you bought a coffee at Starbucks, you're expecting it within a certain range. If the coffee ends up being $50, you'd be surprised and you'd say something. But another sort of common scenario that we're all familiar with, many of us are responsible for checking invoices that come in and reconciling them against a purchase order. So, you know, you have a purchase order for $1,700 for something, and it comes in at $1,800. Well, that might raise an eyebrow. And before you pass that on to accounts payable to get paid, based on your business rules, based on some parameters, you're going to raise a concern about it. If the deviation is expected, if you were alerted to that, you may have to make a note or something in the system. But if it isn't, you want to stop it from moving downstream, because if it moves downstream and gets paid, if it gets entered in the system, it's itself a problem to back it out. But if it goes further and gets paid, it's even worse. Do you have anything on that, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there, when it comes to the invoice processing, you have known quantities, right? You know what you're expecting, and you're right. You can establish thresholds. So if the cost for me to process that invoice is $50, and the difference is $5, well, that's probably one I'm not going to want to pursue. Whereas if it's off by $1,500, I'm certainly am going to want to pursue that. I'm going to want to do, you know, investigation, root cause analysis, and make sure this is not a one-off, right?
Right.
Is it a systemic problem? In which case, you know, part of the process may be not only correcting, you know, correcting it before it gets into the system, but part of that might be I need to do a vendor corrective action because they keep sending me the wrong invoice amount. Or it might be that, hey, you know, the difference is normally I don't charge freight, but this was less than a truckload, so freight was appropriate. So
it makes, yeah, you're checking to make sure it makes sense, but you're applying a business rule there that you can teach, you know, that you can teach to a computer, that you can set up your technology
procedures
to do.
And yes, exactly.
Right. So the idea, the other point here is with these kinds of tasks, very often they're, you know, manually done, again, incredibly time consuming, prone to human error. And you know, when those errors happen, very hard to back out of the system. And these are also ones that are amenable to this automation in particular, because invoices, POs, and things like that, we have technology that can easily recognize those kinds of documents, extract the fields, and do the comparison. So in this instance, you're looking to see that the financial number matches, so the amount matches on the invoice and the PO. But you could be looking for other things, missing information, inconsistent, again, looking for forms of data that don't, duplicates as well, right? So you have 5 invoices for the same thing, you know, because it's come in multiple, you know, through multiple people's inboxes, and they've sent it on to accounts payable. This is a way to catch it before it gets paid multiple times. And the idea, oops, I'm sorry. The idea, though, is if you see something that is inconsistent, so if it works, if it fits within your business rules, you pass it downstream to accounts payable. But if it doesn't, if it's outside of those parameters, again, that you've set based on what you know about your information, what would tick off an exception, you get an alert, and that ticks off potentially the workflow for a human intervention, a person to review it and make sense of that information. And again, the great part is, what you're doing manually, what you're doing on that point in time reconciliation of information, whether that's a cleanup or some kind of routinized task, gives you the business rules to set up this alert functionality upstream.
Right, and focus on the exceptions, the stuff where, you know, everything matches, let it flow through, automatically create the transactions, and only have your folks focusing on those where the anomalies are, the data inconsistencies lie.
So again, missing data and other anomalies. So other anomalies, can we talk about that for just a second? So the scenario I'm looking at is sort of, you know, it's not fitting a pattern. I know you've done some other data cleanups that look for different types of anomalies as well.
Well, sure. I mean, it doesn't have to, it's not always financials, right? It could be inventory. I have multiple systems and I need to validate that the data as it relates to inventory is correct. It's very common for organizations to have multiple systems.
Mhm.
And very often the information, as you said, is siloed, and there's no real way or one pane of glass to
Mhm.
see all that different information, right? I've got Documentum, I've got FileNet, I've got Alfresco, I've got all these different systems that have content that are relevant to my business process, but it's not easy for me to get to it. I've got to go to those different systems, gather information, do investigation, and take corrective action steps. And wouldn't it be nice if I had one pane of glass where I can get all that and apply the business logic across those different platforms?
Mhm.
And really, that's one of the keys to doing continuous audit and analytics is having that breadth and depth where you can reach across those different environments and ensure that the data is consistent and identify the anomalies.
I didn't break that as a separate thing, so I'm glad you brought that up. This idea of having the sort of one locus of where you can see everything, where you can get a perspective on all of the same piece of information as it appears across all of your systems, and very often we don't have that kind of connected approach. So that's another benefit of this. So
Well, that's right. And some people say, hey, put it all into one system. That's not going to happen. I
right.
mean, this idea that I'm going to use this one system and put everything in it, it's not a reality. I mean, the
Mhm.
companies we serve, they have half a dozen or more different systems.
And some of them are so heavily specialized for a particular business use. People want to use those and get advantage of those, so or get the advantages of those specialized tools. And
That's
so
right.
the idea of getting people to use it in a single location. I mean, I think there's some
It's
instances where that
unrealistic,
makes
right?
some. Yeah, well, I think there's some instances where a common repository certainly works, but for highly specialized business tools and applications, I think it makes, I think people generally want to be able to use those. And the idea that you can take a federated approach to this and see the information across all of those systems and pull it together is incredibly helpful.
And
Um,
not only for viewing it, but the remediation, right? So
mhm,
if I identify an exception, say the data in my data warehouse is inconsistent with my system of record,
mhm.
well, can I get all the information related to the exception, stick it in a workflow and bring it to somebody so they can do the investigation and root cause analysis without having to go to those half dozen
Right,
different
and
systems?
make those separate hops,
Right.
which again is one of the sort of value adds of this kind of continuous auditing and analytics, is that you don't have to do those
Yep.
hops. It makes the exception processing so much faster.
Yep.
So some more specific use cases, and we're coming up on time. I have to hand over to you, Jim, to talk a little bit about ASG. But a lot of the scenarios we've talked about, or that you and I had been talking about, are financial scenarios, and there's a reason this has come up. This kind of continuous auditing and analytics has come up in the financial services industry and is a little bit more advanced in terms of its development, and also its use in those industries. And can you tell us a little bit about why that's so?
Well, sure. I mean, roughly 65% of our customers are banking, financial services, and insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of led the charge, right? We were managing their content, but they needed more, right? I need to be SEC compliant. I need to be HIPAA compliant. I need to do certain things from a regulatory perspective, and I need a solution that's going to enable that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I not only need to automate process, I need to lock stuff down, right? Um, so that I can prove compliance to the SEC. And it's not just a matter of saying I'm compliant. You have to prove it, right? You have to
Mm-hmm.
show the audit files, timestamps. You need to be able to prove that you've done that. And so, yes, a driving force for many for some of our solutions, or many of our solutions, were the rigors of that type of industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they are heavily regulated. But it translates to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I worked in manufacturing where they have their own requirements as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I ship goods, I need to have MSDS, certificates of analysis.
Right.
I have all different kinds of content that is very important, right? And that I need to maintain. And being able to ensure that that information is correct and
Mm-hmm.
accurate is essential to most businesses. And more
Exactly.
often than not, we're seeing that companies are looking to this type of capability as a competitive edge, right? So I can continue to slog through this stuff, or I can automate it and give
Mhm.
myself an advantage as an organization.
Mhm. And so while this has come out of the, a lot of this has been developed pretty heavily within the financial industry because of the sort of need of reconciling accounts, numbers in one account versus another, checking, the bank statements against a general ledger, those kinds of scenarios, or multiple systems with financial records in that have to be put into a single statement. And I think you have an example that you're going to talk about that's pretty impressive. Um, this kind of technology can obviously be repurposed anytime that you're doing that sort of task. And again, the manufacturing scenario is an obvious one, comparing batch numbers, lot numbers, and those kinds of things, part numbers as well. So anytime you're looking at those number or code kinds of reconciliations, this is an opportunity for you to use this kind of technology.
That's
Um,
right.
I wondered, do you have anything, just some other sort of one-off interesting examples, or sort of like know your customer scenarios, so you can actually check your customers against, a government, watch list, terrorist watch list.
That's right.
So, and
And that's another good one. Know your customer. Um,
fraud detection is another
Fraud
one. So,
detection is another one that is really key to identify potential fraudulent activity, alert folks to that fact. In some cases, we're actually comparing the watermarks on treasury bills to identify to identify potential fraud.
mhm,
And when we do, it kicks off an automated process where
mhm,
it brings that content into the appropriate people's hands so they can do the investigation and root cause analysis.
mhm.
That's really important. It's not just identifying; it's taking action on it. And
Right,
I tend to
doing
think
something
of
with it, right?
I tend to think of our audit and analytics solution as it's the action engine for our content
Mhm,
solution, right? So you can apply the business logic, you have access to the content, and now I can identify data exceptions and speed issue
mhm.
resolution. That's a big part of what it's all about.
And one of the interesting things we talked about is sort of the ability to set thresholds too. So we talked about the scenario, I gave the example of the PO and invoice reconciliation, where in that scenario, a deviation of a small amount might not be worth your time, money, effort to back out. It's $5. This invoice is $5 more than it's supposed to be. But you can also go the other direction. So to look at bank accounts, if someone's skimming money off, you can start
Or
to
are
detect
people
patterns.
paying me on time? I have
Right,
agreed
right.
upon terms with my
Mhm.
customers, right? They're supposed to be paying me net 30, and if they pay me in 10 days, they're supposed to get a 2% discount.
Right,
Well, they're paying me in 30 and they're taking the 2% discount. That's not
right.
cool. In which case, that's where audit and analytics could really, be
Mhm,
of great benefit to identify customers that are paying you short or outside of term. Is another use case that I think is a
mhm,
great one. Other one that kind of resonates is it's very common for organizations to have data warehouses, right?
mhm,
No matter what it might happen to be, and they're feeding data from multiple sources into those data
mhm,
warehouses. It's another role that audit and analytics can play is checking the data in those data
mhm,
warehouses against the source data to identify any data inconsistencies
mhm.
so that you can actually trust the data in the data
Right.
warehouse, which, people go through these multi-year projects to put together a data warehouse and then nobody trusts it. I mean, I used to be
Mhm,
one of those guys. We implemented SAP. My boss would come to me and say, I don't trust the information in Cognos. So can you pull the data from SAP and do the
mhm,
analysis and give me a summary? And boy, I
mhm,
wish I had audit and analytics back then.
mhm. So again, we're coming up on time. I need to transfer over to you pretty
Oh,
quickly,
great.
but just sort of benefits of continuous audit. We've touched on a lot of these as we've gone through this. So let's just take a quick moment to review. I mean, obviously reduced costs. So if you can stem the issue that was the problem that led to a remediation effort, if you can prevent it from data from becoming non-compliant in the first place and having to do another cleanup, that's a tremendous cost savings. Um, if you remove the expense of manual steps and the cost of errors, and of course we talked about fines in some instances too, for not complying, SEC compliance, for example. There's also, of course, increased efficiency and productivity. Again, you're focusing your effort, your human effort, instead of on all these tasks that could be routinized and handled by our technology, you're focusing them on the tasks that actually need human intervention, resolving these exceptions and making decisions based on that. And then, of course, compliance monitoring. So we talked about the scenario where you're ensuring that people are following the policies. And this isn't meant to be a big brother approach. It's meant to do it better and also make sure that people are doing it. It's one thing to have a policy, but it's another thing to make sure that it's actually being followed and is being enforced. Improved compliance, of course, rather than letting things, just monitoring them, but rather than letting things get out of kilter and out of compliance, data where it shouldn't be or in forms it shouldn't be, you can check it as it's going. And then, of course, this we touched on it on the last slide, this increased reliability and trustworthiness of your information. You want to know that what you have in your systems is the right information, that you can actually rely on it. And I've encountered the situation too. You said data warehouses, data lakes, where people are pulling this information in there to do something with it, do some kind of analysis on it, only to find out that people don't really trust that data, and so those kinds of projects can fail as a result of that. And then, of course, a thing that is interesting too is the repurposing of the analysis that we're doing. We do a lot of tasks that are very similar, things that like doing indexing, for example, for search, enterprise search. We're doing indexing and analytics for e-discovery. And I said that, we don't usually repurpose that information, and there's no reason at this point, if you've done that kind of information, to not capture and repurpose it for something else. Again, because those steps are incredibly costly, incredibly time consuming. So Jim, if you have any more on this, if not, I'll.
The only other benefit I would say is transparency, process transparency.
Absolutely. Of course, because this kind of technology allows you to audit and track.
And trust, right? And yes, that's a big, I would say that's a big benefit as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Jim, I'm going to hand this over to you. Jen, can you do the transition over to Jim? If not, I can advance the slides, Jim.
I'm doing it. Hopefully that's got it.
I see you. Great.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ann.
Thanks.
So we have a solution, Audit and Analytics Services, which it was initially developed as part of our content services, but it's found a new home in our data intelligence part of the business, which is more and more the organizations we serve care about the integrity of their data. And as I said, I think of Audit and Analytics as the action engine for that. It helps our customers ensure regulatory compliance and avoid risk, which is a big thing these days. More and more, the privacy of people's data is of great importance, GDPR, CCPA, and the right to be forgotten, right? I may be your customer now, but once I close my account, you can't keep my stuff forever, and you can't share that information with anybody. And if I want you to delete it, you need to, and you need to prove that you've done that. The next one is more. It's been more pressing, right? This idea that I want to gain insight and intelligence from the information that I'm almost in most cases overwhelmed with, right? So it's very common that the organizations we serve have large quantities of content, and wrapping their arms around all that can be a challenge, not only from a compliance perspective, but from leveraging it so that I can make my business smarter, so that I can make my business more intelligent and gain insights from that data and take action on it. It's not enough to just say, hey, I understand my data. Can I take action on the data when I do find data inconsistencies and anomalies? And we see more and more of our customers are migrating their content to the cloud. And it's a combination of on-premise, on-cloud, hybrid environments. More and more, we're seeing the organizations we serve that 10 years ago wouldn't even think about moving their content to the cloud are embracing it. Folks like Liberty Mutual that has 1 billion documents up on AWS, and their agents, their customers, their adjusters all have access to that information, one-stop shop, and it resides not just in our repository, in Alfresco, in FileNet, et cetera, et cetera. So audit analytics, and I know I'm short on time, it's a policy-based solution. So it's rule-driven. You establish your rules. It leverages Boolean-based logic, regular expressions, data dependencies. We have the most granular policy-based capabilities that I'm aware of. And once you've established those rules, the way I think of it is the old scrubbing bubbles commercial. It does the work so you don't have to. You set it up, you let it run, and it identifies the exceptions. And it's all automated. And it helps drive results. And off to the right here, these are some of the reasons why customers leverage the solution: for compliance, for monitoring, for reconciliation, to validate data, to identify exceptions, and take action on it. And with our just recently, we added a service where that audit and analytics services solution we have can seamlessly integrate with our own workflow capability as well as others. It's not limited to our own workflow. So it's a bi-directional REST capability that allows you to, hey, I identified an exception. Let me pull all the content related to that exception together, put it in a workflow, and route it to the appropriate people for root cause analysis and corrective action steps. And that's powerful because it's not I'm bringing one piece of content, I'm bringing everything that I have that's relevant to that exception, so I can speed the issue resolution and take those corrective action steps before the month end close, before the quarter close, before I close the books for the year. And it's extremely powerful to be able to do that. Now, Mobius, the content solution that audit and analytics are best buddies, we included a workflow component that allows you to design workflows, receive notifications as it relate to workflows, monitor workflows, and it works not just on your desktop, but on any device, mobile devices included. I can interact with workflow from my mobile devices. And both Mobius and Audit and Analytics leverage this smart suggest capability in something we call data miner. It allows you to take a piece of content and you don't have to build the indexing rules. You just press a button and say, suggest the indexing rules to me. And it'll automatically identify all the content within that piece of content and identify what it believes the indexing rule should be. And then if you need to adjust it from there, you can do that. This is powerful because it's using machine learning algorithms to make that parsing of content smart. And that's another one of our claims to fame. And of course, we have very robust REST services for all our capabilities. We offer this solution as a Docker-based deployment, and it's available not only on-prem for Linux, Windows, and mainframe. We're the few folks out there that still offer mainframe solutions. Is also, we support it on Azure as well as AWS. So some of the customers, and I'm running short on time, SEI is one of them where before they had audit and analytics, they do business around the globe. They're wealth management for organizations throughout the world. And each country has their own rules, right? Regarding taxing, reporting, et cetera. So they have different statements for different countries. And not only do they have different statements, they have to audit those statements and make sure they're correct. Not just this month, but this month compared to last month, this month compared to last quarter, this quarter compared to last year. So they have to be consistent and correct. Otherwise, there are significant penalties related to not getting it right. And it used to take them 20 business days to reconcile, to make sure all the statements were correct before they got sent. Now it's taking them less than a week. They used to just do spot audits. Now they have 300 points of articulation. They're checking everything. They're auditing everything. So they have 100% confidence that those statements are correct before they go out the door. Invesco, they started with just one business process, and they found the solution to be so powerful. They quickly expanded it to 16, and I'm glad to say right now they're over, I think, 48 processes, where they saw the power of the solution and they said, hey, we can use this in a lot of different places. And the results are dramatic. They're saving huge amounts of money. And I'm running out of time, so I'm
I'll
kind
take
of
your time,
flying
Jim.
through
Take your
these.
time, Jim.
AP automation, we mentioned it before, and it's a common scenario. And most folks are doing some type of scan capture and some type of automation. Where I think we distinguish ourselves is, like we said, the ability to identify exceptions before they get downstream in the process. And the benefits are dramatic.
And focusing the attention on those exceptions as opposed to the ones that are fine when they're
Well,
matching
yeah,
up.
the role of the people in AP has shifted in this organization, right? They used to be chasing down the exceptions and trying to check for needles in haystacks, right? Now, the bent needles are found for them,
Right.
and they only have to focus on them. They don't have to look at everything anymore. So their role has shifted to one that's much more value add as opposed to task. Now this one is one that's specific to a number of our customers. They're using us. They have multiple systems feeding into their main general ledger, and they need to make sure that that data is correct before it gets posted, because if it's not correct, it's a nightmare trying to back it out. And we have a number of our customers are using us for that general ledger validation, verification, reconciliation, as well as doing likewise for those data warehouses. It's a common scenario that I mentioned earlier. So in a nutshell, I think we should open up the Q&A. I know we don't have a lot of time, but our role or our goal is to deliver intelligent content productivity to our customers with mobile, automated, authorized, actionable, audited, policy-driven content services.
That was great, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of questions in. We do have a few minutes here. We're not going to get to all questions. There are just too many here. But if you have questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A box and send those over to us. We'll be sure to get your answer for you after the webinar. So the first question in, Jim, this one, I think it's for you. What's the best approach to leveraging a solution like audit and analytics?
Well, I think the best approach is identify, pick one case, right? Where there's, you understand the business logic, and we're happy to give us some sample data or content, take that use case, we'll set it up and we'll show it to you. We'll show you exactly how it will work. It's so much more impactful when you can see the solution working with your specific use case. So I would encourage folks to start with one, take a look, and we're happy to do it, to set it up and show you using your own content how the solution would work. So I think that's a good approach, at least to start.
We've got another question in. Jim, there are lots of questions for you. Is it possible for the alert to go, when there's an exception, is it possible for the alert to go to the user, not just maybe the information manager or the AP person?
Definitely. You can route based on role or individual or user groups. So yes, you can definitely, it's very common that, say I have an exception related to a customer. I'm not going to send an email to them notifying that they're short. I'm going to have somebody internally look at that. So yes, that's definitely part of what can be done as part of the solution.
Okay. And I've got this other question here in a couple different forms from a couple different people, but are there certain business processes that are more likely to benefit from continuous audit and analytics?
I think, like I said, just about any business case or business process can benefit. That story I mentioned about Invesco, like they started with one and it grew and it keeps growing. So the obvious ones, AP, AR, HR, probably where most people might start. The largest auto manufacturer in the US doesn't pay their claims unless audited Audit and Analytics says it should. So it's very sophisticated. It's not just auditing, it's step and flow control, waiting for the appropriate content to be there before I take the next step in the process. It's a very sophisticated solution, and I would highly encourage everyone to take a look.
Perfect. And apologies, we are out of time for questions. If you had another question, we'll be sure to get those answers over to you. I want to thank Jim and Ann for today's webinar and all of this incredible knowledge that you've shared with us today. I want to thank you both for continuing to serve this community by sharing your knowledge. Our next webinar is going to be announced very soon, so keep an eye on your email inbox. Before we close, I'd like to remind you to become a professional member of ARMA International. Take the time to invest in yourself, and while you're at it, register for ARMA InfoCon 2020 in Detroit this October. ARMA has an array of resources available for you, from our white papers, training, in our magazine, and so many other things. In our magazine right now, you can read a piece about the Pentagon's warning about DNA privacy and how that is applicable potentially to you. That's available at magazine.arma.org, along with an array of other articles now neatly organized by topic in our new digital format. On behalf of our speakers, the wonderful folks at ASG who were wonderful working with you guys to develop this webinar, who have given their time, their money to sponsor programming like this webinar today, and all of us at ARMA International, I want to thank you, the attendees, for joining today's webinar, and wish you the absolute best in all of your information endeavors. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Dave.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks.